When we talk about the most disappointing seasons in the history of the Denver Broncos, I feel as though this season right here doesn't get talked about enough. The 1970 season started off with so much promise in the first season post-merger, as it genuinely looked like the Broncos were going to make it to the playoffs for the first time in franchise history, or at a bare minimum, have a winning record for the first time ever. They started the season off perfect with a 3-0 record, including a win against the defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs by double digits. 3 weeks into the 1970 campaign, and the Broncos were not just the only undefeated team remaining in the AFC, but were the only team in their division, the AFC West, with a record above 500. It seemed like after a decade of turmoil and being near the bottom of professional football, that head coach Lou Saban was going to turn around the ball club this year, and that this was going to be the year that the Broncos were finally good. Yeah, that did not happen. Because after starting the season off 3-0 and then starting it off 4-1 through the first 5 weeks, the Broncos completely and utterly collapsed. 5 weeks into the 1970 season, and the Broncos were first in the AFC West, tied for first in the entire AFC, and boasted a point differential of plus 33, thanks in part to a top 5 offense and a top 5 defense in the conference. By the time the season ended, the Broncos were 5-8-1, winning just one of their final 9 games, having multiple games where they failed to score a touchdown, and finishing the year with a negative point differential and near the bottom of the league in a ton of statistical categories on both sides of the ball. What started off as such a promising season disintegrated into ashes. The sad part for the Broncos is that it wasn't as though that division was unattainable by any means. The Oakland Raiders won the division with an 8-4-2 record and a point differential of just plus 7. All the Broncos had to do was play 500 ball the rest of the way, and they would have been right in the thick of things. Instead, they went from one of the best teams in the league to one of the worst, and went from a team that seemingly could do everything right to a team that could do nothing right. And the turning point in their season was Week 6 in a game against the San Francisco 49ers. Every game of the collapse that you've been watching this whole time, it stemmed from that one game against San Francisco, and the writing was on the wall with one of their players, who had what might just be the worst weekend by any player in NFL history. If there was ever a weekend where Murphy's Law was in action, and everything that could go wrong ended up going wrong, this was that weekend. Because during Week 6 of the 1970 season, Denver Broncos cornerback Booker Edgerson had a weekend so bad both on and off the field that it ended his playing career forever, and more than half a century later, deserves a deep dive for how infamous it was. Because this is the story behind Booker Edgerson and what might just be, considering the circumstances, the worst weekend for any player in NFL history. Before I break down his struggles, make sure that you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. We post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL, and I would really appreciate your support as we try and grow this community even more. So if you like learning more about bizarre NFL and sports history, then this is the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing, and with that in mind, let's talk about the time that Booker Edgerson did not have an edge whatsoever. Before I talk about the player in question and just what went wrong, we need some context to understand the game that was taking place that weekend, its importance, and how that game was going. It's October 25th, 1970. It's Week 6 of the NFL season, and we've got an absolutely big interconference battle on our hands in the first ever meeting between the Denver Broncos and the San Francisco 49ers. More than half a century later, the Broncos and 49ers have played plenty of big interconference games against each other, including Super Bowl 24, a game that you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, and the regular season finale to the 2006 season, where the Broncos faced a win and in, lose and you're out situation, and the Broncos lost it in overtime, in a game that you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And this was up there with one of the biggest ones, because entering this game, both of these teams were near the top of the NFL, with the Broncos and 49ers each only having one loss through their first 5 games. If the Broncos win, they keep their hold on first place in the AFC West. If the 49ers win, they keep pace with the Los Angeles Rams, and depending on how the results go that week, could wind up in first place in the NFC West. Safe to say, a lot was riding with this game. And this is part of where Booker Edgerson has the weekend from hell. Because sure enough, his team lost the game, as the Broncos lost to the 49ers by a final score of 19-14. It looked really good for the Broncos at the halftime break, as they led it by 2 scores, leading it 14-6. Remember that back in 1970, the 2-point conversion did not exist, as while it existed in the AFL, it did not carry over to the merger in the NFL. You would think that this rule being canned would benefit the Broncos at the half, as instead of leading up by 1 score, they led by 2. Alas, it did not, as the 49ers outscored the Broncos 13-0 over the final 2 periods of the contest. Denver couldn't force any pressure at all, as not only did they not force any turnovers, but they didn't sack John Brody once throughout the contest. Denver was also sloppy with the football, turning it over 3 times, including multiple interceptions that were thrown in the end zone. When you're -3 in the turnover column, especially against a team as good as San Francisco, you're in trouble. The Broncos' passing game was poor, as their 2 quarterbacks, Pete Lisk and Steve Tensey, combined to go 11 for 26 with a passer rating of 29.9, which is worse if you did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. The Broncos seemingly had this game won, and through shooting themselves in the foot, they let the 49ers have it. Alright, so that result in this game that you've been watching this whole time stinks for Booker Edgerson, but let's be honest, that alone doesn't make it one of the worst weekends for any player in NFL history. Just about every week, 16 teams lose, or 13 teams back in 1970. And each team consists of 53 players, less players back in 1970. If simply losing a game, even if it was a game that you were up by 2 scores in, meant that you'd have the worst weekend ever, then that'd be quite the over-exaggeration. However, let's talk about this man right here, Booker Edgerson. For roughly a decade, Edgerson was one of the best cornerbacks in the American Football League, playing with the Buffalo Bills from 1962 to 69, which is what you're seeing highlights of. Unfortunately, there's no footage of him in a Broncos uniform. However, it's going to become very apparent why that's the case in just a little bit. He helped the Bills win 2 AFL championships in 1964 and 1965. And during that 1965 season, he was second on the team with 5 interceptions, being named an all-star in the league, along with practically every other starter on that dominant defense that year. During his time in Buffalo, Edgerson recorded 23 interceptions. This was the second most in franchise history at the time, only behind Butch Bird, and today still ranks comfortably inside the top 10, tied for 7th alongside Nate Clements and Steve Freeman, with no active player currently on the Bills even close to within striking distance of that mark. In other words, Edgerson is one of the best cornerbacks in the history of the Buffalo Bills franchise, and he is still fondly remembered today for how instrumental he was on those championship-winning teams of the 1960s, and for being one of the few bright spots on one of the most inept teams of all time, the 1968 Bills, who you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. However, right before the 1970 season started, Edgerson, despite starting every game for the Bills in 1969, was traded to the Broncos for a draft pick, reuniting him with his old coach in Buffalo, Lou Saban. And when I say that this was right before the season started, I truly mean right before the season started, to the point where Edgerson didn't have time to bring his car over from Buffalo. Because of this, he was using a friend's car to get around Denver for the time being. And I don't know what kind of car his friend had, but I'm going to take a gander and say that outside of the Ford Pinto, it might be the worst car to ever exist. Because on October 25th, just one day before the game against the 49ers, this man, Booker Edgerson, was driving to the team facility to practice, and the car just decided to have a mind of its own. As Edgerson said, "I was going to practice Saturday and rolled it. I still haven't been able to figure out what happened. I was going 15 to 20 miles per hour and made a left turn, and the car rolled over on its left side. Try to figure that one out. That's right. He wasn't speeding, he didn't get hit, he wasn't distracted, he wasn't doing anything illegal. He made a left turn and the car became as light as a feather and just rolled over, injuring Edgerson in the process to some extent. And because of this injury, head coach Lou Saban was thinking about not playing Booker Edgerson for the 49er game. He might be too shaken up and might not be at full strength, which makes sense, seeing as anytime a car rolls over and you're the driver in the car, especially considering how poor safety standards were for cars in the early 1970s, and what we assume is a car from the 1960s compared to now, you're going to feel it. You're going to feel some pain. But Edgerson was a warrior. He was going to fight through it and play. Saban asked him on Saturday and again on Sunday if he was sure about this, thinking about the well-being of his player and someone he knew pretty well over the years from his time in Buffalo. But Edgerson was going to play. This game and this moment was too important. Take a wild guess as to what happened next. That's right, he suffered a knee injury due to something in his ligaments and was out for the season, spending an entire week in the hospital too. At some point during the contest, while on special teams, he got hit by a 49er and went to the ground. Whether he would have been okay or at full strength and wouldn't have been in a position to get hit or wouldn't have gotten injured if the car accident didn't happen is unknown, and we can speculate all day about that. However, Edgerson said afterwards, the way things turned out, I guess I should have told coach that I was shaken up and taken a day off. And the injury was so bad that he never ended up playing in the NFL again, as his knee never fully recovered. He was waived by the Broncos the following August after 10 months of no progress being made on the knee whatsoever. He didn't sign anywhere else, and his NFL career was done with 106 games played and 23 interceptions. So just to recap how bad everything was for this man right here, Booker Edgerson, during this weekend. While driving to practice, his car rolled over as it was tipped over by a ghost or something. He's in pain, but decides to give it a go and play for the Broncos. And he winds up getting his knee destroyed, being out for the season and for the rest of his career, never playing again. And his team lost the game as well. In a 24-hour stretch, he suffered multiple injuries, a loss, and a car wreck. Short of doing self-inflicted things or short of death, I'm honestly not sure it gets a whole lot worse than that. Booker Edgerson during this October weekend in 1970 was living Murphy's Law. That's the only explanation I've got. It really is. This was the omen for just how bad and just how unlucky the Broncos would be for the rest of the 1970 season. This showed just how snake-bitten that team truly was over the second half of the season following their 4-1 start. Losing a game? That's one thing. Losing a game and getting injured and missing the rest of the season? Sucks, but we see that a ton. Losing a game and getting injured and missing the rest of the season and never playing again as a result of that injury? Sucks, but it can happen. Losing a game and getting injured and missing the rest of the season and never playing again as a result of that injury and suffering a car crash when your car rolled over, potentially aggravating that career-ending injury? Yeah. Good luck topping that. Booker Edgerson's career might be best remembered all these years later for how it ended and the bizarre way that it came to an end. Because during this weekend in 1970, it was very clear that Booker Edgerson did not have a winning edge. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and check out my other channels, JG8 for the history of college football, JG7 for the history of baseball, and JG9 News, where we talk about all things happening in the NFL. Join me every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play live NFL trivia for cash prizes. And make sure to join me live, as we're on stream just about every single day. And thanks to all our Patreon members and our YouTube members for helping out the channel. See how you become a member and show your support financially in the description down below.